All right. Well, hello and welcome to this meeting for the Los Angeles Coastal Area Special Resource Study. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah Bodo, and I'm a project manager with the Denver Service Center Planning Division, which is a part of the National Park Service. I'd just really like to thank everyone who's taking the time to join us today and for your interest in this special resource study. So today I will present an overview of the special resource study. And in addition to introducing the study, the purpose of this meeting is to explain what the criteria is that the National Park Service will consider in the study process and answer any questions that you might have. And we'll also invite you to share your feedback about the study. So how this virtual meeting will work is that we'll go through a slideshow presentation that you can view through this tool, the video conferencing platform, which is Microsoft Teams. However, if you prefer to follow along using on your own, you can also find a copy of this presentation posted to the study website. And that link is posted here, or we'll post in the chat in just a moment here. And then I'll also pull up a slide to show you how to access that document. I'm also going to provide a brief technical orientation so everyone knows some key functions of Microsoft Teams. And then also we are recording this meeting today so that if anyone who missed the meeting would like to watch it, we'll be able to post it to the project website in about a week. All right, so I have several of my colleagues here from the National Park Service that are joining me. You'll hear from them later in today's presentation, but I'll briefly introduce them. So we have Eric Frenzel from our regional office. We have Carrie Miller from the Park Planning and Special Studies Program Office, and Ann Dove, who is with the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Association with the National Park Service. So now I will share the slides. Oops. Okay, so everybody should be able to see the presentation slides on your screen now. And the image here is of the Pacific Ocean with Manhattan Beach in the background. Also on the slide, we show the two public meetings that we will be hosting. So the one today that is happening now, and then we have another one scheduled for 1 month from now on March 11th in the evening. The two presentations will be identical. And again, you can access the slides on the project website, and we'll post a recording of today's meeting on the project website. All right. So on this slide, we have our meeting goals. We also have some icons on the left that just show people meeting and dialogue boxes. But our meeting goals today include, first, we want to introduce the special resource study and explain why the National Park Service is conducting this study. Then we will go to an explanation of the study process and answer some common questions, including what is the study area, what are the criteria for evaluation, and what is the study timeline. We'll also invite you to share your feedback and explain how to do so. This presentation will take about 30 minutes, and then we'll use the remaining time today to answer your questions. And we're holding this meeting today because we know that you have information and perspectives about the locations being considered in this study. And public meetings like this are really critical for us to have gained that understanding we need to do the evaluation. So thank you for joining us. I also wanted to say thank you to those of you who have already provided information related to the study, either through the project website or by contacting me directly. And those of you that have helped get the word out about this meeting today and the public comment period. All right, on this slide, so now I want to walk you through just how to download the slides that we're presenting right now. So this slide shows a screenshot of the project webpage, and circled in red on the left-hand side is document list. So if you click on document list, then you will be able to access a copy of the presentation. All right, moving on to a brief technical orientation. So for this event, we're using Microsoft Teams, and some of the key functions on this slide we're showing, it's probably in the bottom left-hand corner, a megaphone icon, which allows you to adjust the sound. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a closed captioning icon, which allows you to use the Microsoft closed captioning. But we also have a live person who is providing closed captioning today. And to view her captions, we'll post the link to access those into the Q&A right now. All right. So then we'll get to another important feature for this meeting, which is the question and answer function, the Q&A function. This is how you can interact with us during the presentation by entering your questions. And so on this slide we show, it should be in the upper right-hand corner, and it's an icon that shows 2 dialog boxes with a question mark in that. And I will also want to note that we won't be responding to questions until we're done with the presentation. We do have a lot of information to share, and we may answer some of the questions that you have over the course of this presentation. But once we wrap up, we're more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so that's our technical overview. To start with our presentation, we'll start with a quick overview of the National Park System. So the National Park Service manages 433 individual units with various designations, such as national parks, national historic sites, national monuments, national lakeshores, and many others. These units are commonly referred to as units within the National Park System. And then on this slide, we have a map which shows those 433 units, either as green dots or as green areas. So special resource studies, like the one that we are undertaking now, are directed by legislation, and they provide information to Congress to consider about whether to add a new unit to the National Park System. All right, so moving on to what is a special resource study. So they are designed to provide Congress with non-binding information about the resource qualities in a study area and their eligibility to be designated as a unit of the National Park System or other special designation. And special resource studies evaluate the area based on established study criteria. These studies are prepared for the Secretary of the Interior, who will submit the study along with any other recommendations to Congress for consideration. And an important point to note, which is bolded on this slide, is that the study itself does not establish new park units. That can only be done through Congress, through legislation, or by the President through the use of the Antiquities Act. So when this study is completed by us and is transmitted to Congress, nothing more will happen until Congress or the President takes action, if either chooses to do so at any point in the future. If they don't take action, it's possible that nothing will happen as a result of this study. And also wanted to add a brief note about our terminology and what we mean when we say national or park units. So internally for the National Park Service, Management and Administration, we call every type of unit a park as shorthand. So when we say that the study evaluates sites as a potential park unit, this doesn't suggest that the site would officially be designated as a national park, but rather that it would become part of the National Park System. The official name and designation of an area or site would be assigned by Congress or the President at the time, at that time. and the study doesn't make any recommendations on that matter. All right. So why is the National Park Service conducting this study? And the answer to that is that Public Law 117-328 directs the Secretary of the Interior to conduct the special resource study. And then the Department of Interior charged the National Park Service with the preparation of this study, and then our study team has been tasked with its completion. And on this slide, we have a screenshot of the Public Law 117-328, which describes the special resource study or requires it to be completed. All right, so now we'll move on to the preliminary study area. So on this slide, we have in bold text what the legislation calls for as far as the study area boundary. And I'll read that. So it's the coastline and adjacent areas to the Santa Monica Bay from Will Rogers State Beach to Torrance Beach, including the areas in and around Ballona Creek and the Baldwin Hills and the San Pedro section of the City of Los Angeles, excluding the Port of Los Angeles north of Crescent Avenue. So this map in red depicts the preliminary study boundary, and it comes from that description in the law with a focus on public lands in that area. And we did it excludes private residences and other private properties. So just to give a little bit more description, so the boundary coastline, that red line along the coastline, it runs from Will Rogers State Beach to Torrance Beach, as well as the coastline in San Pedro. And the coastline is interpreted as the area from mean high tide line of the sea to approximately 200 yards inland from the mean high tide line. The 200-yard number is an effort to include the beach areas and the public lands while excluding private property from the study area. In cases where private property is within the 200 yards, those properties are excluded from the study. And then looking down to the San Pedro coastline, the same 200 yards exists for that. But that study area line runs from the Royal Palms Beach Park in the west to in the east where Crescent Avenue would intersect the coastline. And then in addition to the coastline, the study area also includes Ballona Creek and Bike Path, the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Preserve, and the Baldwin Hills. So this study area is described by legislation with, to the best of our knowledge, private lands removed. If you are aware of public lands that are not within this boundary, but that you feel would be important for the study team to evaluate, please feel free to make any suggestions in your comments. Property owners may also request that we do not include their property within the study boundary. So as we continue to collect information and with your feedback, we will continue to further refine the study area. All right, so let's move on to the study criteria. So the legislation and NPS policy require using the following criteria to evaluate the study area. And a study area must meet all 4 of the criteria. So the first one is it must contain nationally significant resources. The second one is it must be suitable. The third one is it must be feasible as a potential unit of the national park system. And finally, it also must require direct management by the National Park Service. So all 4 criteria must be met for a study area to have an overall positive finding. And I'll explain these criteria a little further on the next slides. All right, so criterion 1 is focused on national significance. So a study area must contain nationally significant natural and/or cultural resources. And this slide talks a little bit more about the cultural resources. So for cultural resources, national historic landmark criteria are applied to determine whether a site is nationally significant. A team of historians confer to determine whether the site meets the high standard set by the National Historic Landmark criteria. I'd also like to note that this analysis, this study, does not lead to National Historic Landmark designation. Rather, the landmark criteria are used for the purposes of this study as an evaluation tool. All right, next slide, we're still on criterion 1, national significance. So in turn, natural resources must meet all of the following criteria to be considered nationally significant. First, they must be outstanding examples of a particular type of resource. They must possess exceptional quality or value in illustrating or interpreting the natural or cultural themes of our nation's heritage. They must offer superlative opportunities for public enjoyment or for scientific study. And they must retain a high degree of integrity as a true, accurate, and relatively unspoiled example of a resource. And the picture in this example is mammoth fossils at Waco Mammoth National Monument in Texas. And in that SRS, or that special resource study, the fossils did meet that criteria. And eventually, this site was designated as a national monument. All right, let's move on to criterion 2, which is suitability. So this criteria requires that a site represent a natural or cultural resource that is not already adequately represented in the national park system. Or it represents a resource that is not comparably represented and protected for public enjoyment by another land managing entity. So in other words, the question that we will ask is, would designating the area make it redundant with another national park unit or redundant with a place that is managed by another entity? Moving on to the third criterion, feasibility. So for this criteria, the study team will do a thorough analysis of the sites or the area's feasibility as a potential national park unit. And to meet this criterion, the study area must be of sufficient size and appropriate configuration to ensure long-term protection of the resource and visitor enjoyment. And it must be capable of efficient administration by the National Park Service at a reasonable cost. For this criterion, we also look at other feasibility factors, and those include the current land ownership of the site, acquisition costs, if any, life cycle maintenance costs. We also consider access, so how easily visitors can get to the site. And we also consider any threats to the resource that we should be aware of, as well as staff or development requirements to administer on the site. And on this screen, we have an image of the Reconstruction era National Historical Park boundary. In that case, it does show several dispersed sites in one area. Okay, the fourth and final criterion involves an evaluation of the need for National Park Service management. So this criterion states that a study area must demonstrate that direct management by the National Park Service is clearly superior to other management approaches. So in cases where a site is well managed and maintained, interpreted, and open for public visitation, and the current management entity is essentially doing everything that the National Park Service would do, and they would continue their management for the foreseeable future, a site might not meet this criterion, might not meet the criterion if that was the case. But alternatively, if a study analysis finds that there's something that the National Park Service could do that would enhance the current function of the site in terms of its historic preservation, access, interpretation, or education, this criterion could be met. All right, I will move on to our study process. So on this slide, we have kind of the high-level overview of the study process. We are currently in the first stage, which is public input and research. Following that, we will do our analysis, and so we'll apply those 4 criteria that we just talked about. And when we are complete with that, the study will be submitted to Congress. At that point, it will be up to Congress or the president to take action or not. There is no timeline for further action from Congress or the president. Also, again, the completion of the study does not establish a new park unit. Only Congress or the president has that authority to designate new units of the National Park System. All right. I also wanted to provide some information on the range of park unit management because we often get questions on this. So if a study area were to meet all 4 criteria, there are, and designated as a unit in the National Park System, there are a range of management structures that a National Park unit could operate under. So we have 3 kind of broad categories. The first one being 100% National Park Service ownership. In that case, the National Park Service would be responsible for all park functions, fully responsible, including management and maintenance of property within the park boundary, park operations, visitor programs, etc. In that case, partner organizations may support the park, but they do not have management responsibility. And this is the case, this is the model for most national park units. The second example that I would like to share is jointly managed partnership parks. And in this case, the National Park Service and an authorized partner or partners would share responsibilities for ownership, management, and maintenance or operations, and they would do that via formal agreements. And now these can vary widely by different park units, and I'll share a few examples in the next couple of slides. And finally, the third category is National Park System or Service management without ownership. And in those cases, the Park Service does not own, administer, or maintain property within the park boundary. In some cases, the National Park Service may use a leased facility or a partner-owned facility via an agreement for park operations. So I'll share a couple examples. All right. So this example is of Joshua Tree National Park, and this is an example of 100% National Park Service ownership and management. And again, most of the units in the National Park System involve this full ownership where the National Park Service owns and manages all or most of the land and properties within the park's authorized boundary. So in this case, the National Park Service owns and manages over 700,000 acres, all the natural and cultural resources on those acres, facilities, and the infrastructure within those within that area. However, the park's legislated boundary also includes almost 20,000 acres of non-federal lands not managed by the National Park Service. And you can kind of see those on the map. They are the non-green areas within the park boundary. And for Joshua Tree, the park was initially established as a national monument through the Antiquities Act. And then later it was expanded, the boundary was expanded several times and eventually redesignated as a national park by Congress. And this evolution of boundary expansion is not uncommon among older parks like Joshua Tree National Park. All right, my next example is for a jointly managed partnership park. And the example is Eby's Landing National Historical Reserve, which is in Washington. And this is an example where the National Park Service owns some of the lands, but other entities own other parts, and they have an agreement, an authorized agreement with the National Park Service. So, so in this case, most of the land within the reserve is privately owned, and the rest is owned in combination, a combination of local, state, and federal ownership. The National Park Service has acquired some lands and easements critical to preservation and interpretation of the reserve. And those include scenic overlooks, historic structures, some historic agricultural buildings, and some active farmlands. But management of the reserve is guided by an interlocal agreement for the administration of the reserve. I will also note that joint management parks, partnership parks, are complex, demanding, and time intensive, but they can also be rewarding for the organizations involved, including the National Park Service. All right. My third example of a jointly managed partnership park is Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park. And this is an example where the National Park Service does not own any of the property. So this boundary you can kind of see on the map here in green. So the authorized boundary is large, and it includes World War II era factories, assembly structures, support facilities, and housing. And the park interprets this site, and the National Park Service helps tell the story of the World War II Homefront effort nationwide. But the National Park Service does not own any property here. Instead, the service cooperates with and provides technical assistance to owners of the historic resources and nonprofit organizations that support the park's mission. So just to kind of reiterate, these two versions of jointly managed partnership parks, they could be established and exist because of language in a park's legislation or proclamation, other agreements, leasing opportunities, or other documents authorizing a collaborative working relationship. All right. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the timeline. So the chart on this slide shows that kind of the major steps in our timeline. And listed first is the data gathering phase. So the study team has been gathering information for the past few months and will continue to do so through the spring. The second row shown is for public outreach, and that is occurring now. And then starting in the spring, the study team, kind of late spring, the study team will analyze the 4 special resource study criteria and prepare the report. And we anticipate that we will finalize the study findings in early 2027. And at that point, the study will be ready for the Secretary of Interior to transmit the study to Congress. The study will be made publicly available after congressional submission. And please keep in mind, there is no specific timeline for the presentation to Congress. All right. Well, now that we've introduced the study process and evaluation criteria, I would like to transition to the reason we are presenting today, and that is that we are wanting to hear from you, wanting your feedback. We have 5 prompting questions. And these are things that I hope that you will take some time when you're ready to respond and give us your responses via the project website. And I'll read the questions right now. So the first one is, what are the nationally significant cultural resources in the study area that should be managed and protected by the National Park Service? The second question is the same, except instead of cultural resources, we're asking about natural resources. So what are those nationally significant national resources that we should study? Third question, what role, if any, would you like the National Park Service to serve in the management of resources in the study area? Number 4, is what concerns do you have that we should be aware of and or address in the study process? And then our fifth question is, do you have any other comments you would like to share with us? So when you are ready to submit your ideas and thoughts on those 5 questions, there are several ways that you can submit feedback. The first way, well, I guess there's 2 ways. The first way is to enter your comments directly on the project website. And I will go through some slides just showing how you can do that if you haven't clicked around there yet. And we do encourage you to submit your comments via the project website. We believe it's the easiest way for you, and it's also the easiest way for us to receive your comments in an organized way. But you do also have the option to mail in your comments, and the address is on this slide here. But please do so between now and April 6th. That is when our comment period will be open through. And again, having a time period really allows us to organize and collect the information in an efficient way. So thank you in advance for sharing your thoughts and input for the benefit of the study. Okay, so to just demonstrate how to use the website, this slide shows a screenshot of the project website. To make your comments, what you'll do is on the left-hand side, circled in red, it says open for comment. So click there, and then you'll be taken to another screen. This is another screenshot. On this screen, you'll want to click on February 2026 newsletter. And that will take you to the next page, and there are a few pages or a few clicks that you have to do. So when you click on that, it'll take you to this screenshot page, which says February 2026 newsletter, and it has 2 buttons that say comment now. So you can click on either one of those buttons, and that will take you to our form to provide your comments. And this screen shows what that page looks like. So you can enter your information there and begin typing in your answers to the questions. And when you're finished entering your comments, click the submit button, and then we'll receive your feedback directly. All right. Well, this concludes our presentation on the Los Angeles Coastal Area Special Resource Study. Thank you again for your interest. At this time, we'll transition to answering any questions that you may have. And I will hand it off to my colleague, Wes Mize, a planner with the Denver Service Center. And let me bring him on screen here. And he'll be running us through the question and answer instructions and moderating the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So now for submitting questions. You can submit those by typing them into the Q&A field. And with this slide, I will show you exactly how that works. So what you'll want to do is click in the upper right-hand corner, following that white mark. There's a question mark symbol that will allow you all to turn on the question and answer feature on or off. As I mentioned, the upper white arrow on this slide points to where that question mark icon is. When you're looking at the Q&A tab, you will see a purple bar at the bottom right corner of the screen, which is indicated here using the downward facing white arrow. Click on that purple button if you like to type a question for us to answer. When you click on the Ask a Question button, it will allow you to type in your question. You are not required to use your name when submitting a question. You are able to post them anonymously if you would like. Certainly, if you would like to include your name, you are able to do that as well. All questions will need to be typed for us to answer, and please include detail in your question to help us understand them. Some of you have already submitted questions, so we can just jump in right from the get-go here. The very first question is one for you, Sarah. Someone asked, everyone in Marina del Rey, Playa del Rey, Westchester, Venice, Santa Monica, and beyond want to stop the massive bulldozing project the fuel industry has engineered to destroy the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. We want the National Park System to take over the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve, where 1,700 species of wildlife live, including threatened and endangered species. Please take over the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve in Playa del Rey and stop the fossil fuels destruction and ecologically catastrophic plan. Can you do this, please?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And I guess one thing I will say is that that sounds more like a comment that I would definitely encourage the person who wrote that to include on the project website. We do have the Ballona watershed ecological, sorry, I'm forgetting the name, but that is within our study area right now. So we will be analyzing that as part of our study.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Our next question is also for you, Sarah, and someone is curious, who directed the NPS to conduct this study?
Yeah, great question. So there is a law, and that is, let's see, I think I have it on this one of the slides. So Congress directed the Secretary of Interior to conduct this study. Studies are supposed to be completed within 3 years of receiving funding. So we did receive funding for this project last year in 2025, and then the Secretary of Interior, delegated it to the National Park Service, and our project team was then assigned to complete this study. And the law was originally introduced by California legislators. And I'm sorry, I don't have them at the tip, but I know that Representative Liu was, I think, the original sponsor, and there were 6 co-sponsors of, of that original bill. So this request came from, Congress members and eventually became a law, and that's why we're responding to it.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next question is one for Carrie. Carrie, someone is curious. With regards to a joint management, where NPS does not own land, would the NPS be another entity requiring review of any project proposals related to the beach? For example, an agency that reviews projects alongside the Coastal Commission, county, and state.
Yeah, thanks, Wes, and thank you for the question. So for partnership parks where there's a much larger authorized boundary for the park, but the National Park Service only may directly own and manage a small portion of the land and properties within that boundary, the National Park Service defers to the existing local, state, regional agencies to continue their responsibilities for land use regulations within that zone, and that may include coastal areas if coastal areas and beaches are within that legislative boundary. In some cases, for existing park units, those park units have a special authority granted to them by Congress in their enabling legislation or subsequent legislation that allows them a reviewing authority on projects outside of those lands that they directly manage. But that's a special authority that Congress granted that park and the National Park Service. So that's a special mandate that Congress would need to apply in those cases. So it's not guaranteed that every park would have that reviewing role on lands outside of their direct management role.
Thank you, Carrie. Our next question is for you, Sarah. This question is similar to the first in that it's all about Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. It notes the natural resources to be protected in the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve in Playa del Rey are 1,700 species of wildlife, including threatened and endangered species. We need to stop plans to destroy the Ballona Wetlands and kill all of those animals, plans devised by the fossil fuel industry in collusion with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They are calling it a restoration, but it is a wholesale destruction to give the fossil fuel industry ability to upgrade its underground gas storage facility.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. Again, I would ask that you include that into our project website as part of your public comment. And we are considering the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve as a part of the study boundary.
Our next question is also for you, Sarah. Someone is curious, what would be the benefits of having the NPS manage this area in contrast to the situation now? What would be the downsides?
That's a great question. And I don't know that I can fully answer it. Some of that would depend on, if it were designated, what the legislation would say, how things would be managed, whether things would be managed in partnership or not. But I can provide some general thoughts. So the National Park Service is required to conserve unimpaired the scenery, natural and historic objects and wildlife of parks, and to provide for their enjoyment by the public. So that's our overall mission. So that would be applied to any lands owned by the National Park Service if that were to occur. National parks can also generate economic activity in nearby communities. And sometimes, that can be most significant if a site is not currently open to the public, but then becomes open to the public. Federal ownership of land, so if that were to occur, also just requires compliance with federal laws and National Parks System policy, which can be different from local and state laws and policy. If this were a case of a national park unit was designated, but existing property ownership was maintained, then the management that those entities like counties, city, state governments, those operational management details would not necessarily change. They would still be fully under control of those entities. So that in some cases there may not, if this were to be designated, there maybe wouldn't be significant changes in that arena. But I would also say if a national park is designated, the Park Service would seek to work collaboratively with local communities and existing agencies on common goals for resource protection and recreational opportunities. And I'll also say that the specifics on changes or benefits will not be addressed in the study evaluation. We are truly focusing on the 4 criteria and details about, what would actually occur if it were to occur would be detailed in legislation or agreements and future planning documents. Carrie, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, I think you did a great summary, Sarah. The only thing I would add, so what is not available now is congressional appropriations outside of national park units or areas that the National Park Service oversees and administers. So if there were like a partnership park established, Congress could authorize the National Park Service to expend those authorized funds to help assist other agencies and organizations in resource protection or recreational opportunities. So it would allow an additional authority to expend more than what is currently available through our external technical assistance programs.
Great, thank you for that additional information, Carrie. Thank you, Sarah, for your detailed reply. Carrie, the next question is one for you. Someone is curious if we can share examples of non-cultural state or local parks that have been incorporated into the national park system.
Non-cultural? You mean, I'm assuming that means, wait, I think I need to read the question again. Local parks. So let's see, I see the question here. Can you share examples of non-cultural state or local parks? So one of our, just focusing on state and local at this moment, so one of the first criteria is looking for resources of national significance, national cultural and national natural significance. So state and local parks, they would have to, within the study area that Sarah showed on the slides, they would need to first contain those nationally significant resources. And we have lots of, every park in the system, all 433 units, all include those resources. And some of them may have started out as resources protected by state and local parks. So many, many in our national park system. And there are lots of resources on nps.gov that give a sense of what the whole variety of parks are, but there are many in California, and many in adjacent park units are also protected under state parks, in particular California State Park, Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. It cooperatively works with California State Parks to manage significant resources within that boundary, for example.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. Our next question is for you, Sarah. Someone is curious, how will the NPS consult with state agencies?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we have reached out to all the property owners in the study area and just asked if they would like to meet with us and provide more information on their properties. So that is the primary way that we are seeking information for the study. If there are other agencies that would like to provide information to us, we are open to meeting with those organizations. So please feel free to reach out to me. My email was on the screen for a bit there and is also in some of the study materials. And Carrie, did you want to add anything there?
Nope, I think that's good. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question is also for you, Sarah. Someone is curious, an area of interest near the shoreline is the Venice canals, which are beyond the 200 yards from the high tide area. Will the study consider including that kind of area?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So our preliminary boundary area or study area does not include beyond the mean high tide line. That said, if there are significant reasons, if you feel that the criteria could be met for areas beyond that, we welcome your feedback and your thoughts on that. But we developed the study area really based on the legislation and focused on that. So we do welcome additional ideas.
Appreciate you sharing that, Sarah. Another question for you here. Will the NPS conduct a NEPA for this study?
Right, good question. No, we will not. Well, this falls under the categorical exclusion rule for NEPA. So this will not be like an environmental assessment.
Another question for you, Sarah. To what extent does the study specify the unique ecosystems that the coastal area present versus that of a land and soil park?
Well, we do have a section of the study which will talk about the natural resource context, and that's where we'll pull in data about what makes, what is special, unique, how does this area meet the criteria that we must apply to it. So as far as that, we will attempt to be thorough in our analysis of the unique ecosystems. I guess I don't quite know what the person is asking versus that of a land and soil park. So if you do want to write in further details on your question, we can try to address that as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question is also for you. Someone is curious, can the NPS study include the management of ocean/marine resources offshore of the study area?
Yeah, so currently it does not include that because our study boundary does not go there. If there's compelling reasons for us to include that in the study area, please let us know. We're really in this kind of early feedback gathering stage.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Next question. The Venice Grand Canal and Ballona Lagoon must be included. There are unique natural resources that should be protected. My question is, how does court-mandated ESA protections of these areas impact the decision whether to include them? It would seem that would raise the level of importance.
I guess I wasn't, at least for so far, I haven't been aware of that. We can definitely include that in part of our analysis for, you know, the natural resources for the area. But everything we'll be doing in this study will be really looking at those criteria and assessing the properties against that.
Thank you for
But thank
that.
you for, thank you for providing that additional info. We can look into it.
Next question asks, does the study include Grand Canal and Ballona Lagoon, natural wetlands, from Washington Boulevard to Marina del Rey, and or the existing Red Line Bridge, which may be the oldest existing bridge in Los City? The Red Line Bridge is located on lot 731 and carried the Red Line car over the Abbot Kinney Grand Canal to drop passengers out at the beach.
I might ask Anne if you have anything to share here. The study area is very large, so along the coastal area, we were really looking at that 200-yard line from mean high tide line. So if those areas that are mentioned are within that, we are including them in the study area. If not, we currently are not. However, again, please provide us with additional information if you think we should, and just really let us know why. Anne, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I think we would have to look more detailed at the maps to identify those specific locations. But as you mentioned, if folks want to see those areas and want to share information about why it would be appropriate to include those in the study area, those would be great comments to submit. Very helpful.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, our next question is for you. How might NPS involvement along the Los Angeles coast affect fishing and hunting regulations? Would this lead to changes in the existing state marine protected areas?
Yeah, and that's really dependent on land ownership. So if land ownership did not change, then nothing would change with fishing and hunting regulations or existing state marine protected areas. If there was National Park Service ownership, I guess there would be the possibility of some changes, but you know, those types of things have to be really thoroughly considered and worked out. So there's some unknowns. Carrie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think hunting and fishing, because the study area is really limited to the specifics legislated in the study legislation, we're pretty limited on the resources that we're able to fully evaluate. But certainly, it doesn't hurt to enter those kinds of comments about your concerns, and we'll always be looking for overlap and bear that in mind when we're gathering information and doing the study analysis. So really, a lot of these comments have to do with good information, feedback, and input from you all that's exactly the kind of information we're looking for in the comments that you enter online on our park planning site. So thank you for thinking of all this. These are good suggestions and good to gather it all online in one place.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. Sarah, the next question is for you. Someone is curious, are we able to see the data collected thus far?
Yeah, good question. The study information is not publicly available and will not be until the report is sent to Congress and presented to Congress. At that point in time, the entire study will be publicly available. The materials that we have so far are the newsletter and this presentation that are publicly available.
Thank you for that. Carrie, I believe you would probably be the best person to answer this next question. Someone is curious, will the study also provide recommendations on the range of park unit management options?
Thanks, Wes. So for any resources that meet all four of the criteria, national significance, suitability, that looks for redundancy in the national park system or by others, feasibility, and the need for NPS management for only those resources that meet all four of those criteria, we move forward and look at a range of alternatives, management options, scenarios that could work for just those resources. And that could include partnership models, that could include ownership models. We really run a range of scenarios, and then we, through the National Park Service Director, selects the most efficient and effective option to put forward in the recommendation. So it's in that process. So that's a long answer to yes, if there are resources that meet all those criteria, there will be management options identified and then ultimately selected, thinking about efficiency and effectiveness.
Thank you for that, Carrie. The next question is also one that I think is best directed to you. Someone is curious, if there's more that needs to be investigated and researched beyond what the study team might not be aware of, is it possible the finalized study findings might take longer? Would that take additional congressional legislation to obtain further time to present the study to Congress?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a tall order to analyze and evaluate every resource within any congressionally legislated boundary. Inevitably, there's always more research that can be done. So we are time bound to complete this study within our process. If there was something, and within that study, if we identify potential for delving into additional research, we'll identify that opportunity, that potential research opportunity in the study. But what we are mainly driven by is knowing enough to at least make a recommendation and findings based on the criteria that we're required to answer. And if there was something big that needed additional study or a boundary change or more time, that would require additional congressional legislation to fundamentally change the original directive from the law. So I think that answers that question. Sarah or anyone else like to add to that?
No, thanks, Carrie.
Carrie, the next question is also for you. What if the NPS assumed management of some of these areas, how would they be protected in perpetuity? What sort of permanent protections prevent future development or sale of NPS managed or owned property? For example, conservation easements, deed restrictions, etc.
It really depends on what the NPS authority is granted within the enabling legislation for any park. So for the authority for NPS to acquire and directly own and manage properties, then National Park Service does protect and manage those properties in long-term perpetuity. That's our mission under the Organic Act and subsequent laws. Now, for areas that are not under direct authority management and ownership by National Park Service, if there are conservation easements in place, it really depends on the terms of those easements. Any other overlay authorities for which the National Park Service has some kind of legal role. It really depends on what goes into that. And otherwise, the National Park Service, if they don't have an ownership or management responsibility for resources within the park boundary, then those could be subject to change. It really depends on the enabling legislation and what it grants the National Park Service authority to do.
Thank you for that, Carrie. And take a little break because the next question is for Sarah. Sarah, someone is curious. What additional public engagement events are currently scheduled, and how will the public be informed prior to these events?
We have one additional virtual public meeting scheduled. It is scheduled for March 11th at 6 p.m. Pacific time. Let's see. So as far as how the public will be informed, I sent out an email to everyone on our mailing list. If folks want to be added to the mailing list, they can go to our project website and get added there. So we'll add folks to the website. Additionally, it's posted on our project website, the date it went out in a press release. And then I definitely encourage everybody who's listening, with your networks, if you know of other folks that would be interested in attending, please share the information with them. We really appreciate hearing from as many people as possible or who are interested.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question is also for you. Someone asks, using your map with the study area in red combined with stating that 200 yards is the limit inland, yet you mentioned inland, can the boundary go further inland with federal land? For example, LAX Airport Dune is owned by the U.S. Department of Commerce, administered by the FAA, and could that federal land be added to the national park and included in the study? Other federal lands, such as U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, owns and manages Ballona River estuary and levees, and could that land, being federal, be transferred to the NPS, or recommended the Ballona Creek levees and the detached breakwater island that is a federal land be recommended for transfer to the NPS? Could the California Coast National Monument, with 6 locations in Palos Verdes Peninsula, stay in the USDI, but transferred from BLM to the NPS?
Yeah, thanks for that comment. That's exactly the kind of, at least one of the types of comments that we're interested in hearing about is if there are public lands that are in the area, but maybe not currently within our boundary, but you believe contains significant cultural resources or natural resources and should be evaluated as part of the study, let us know. And we will look into that. If we do make changes to the boundary, we will contact property owners and request information from them, and also just confirm that they want their property to be included in the study area.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question is also for you. Will these questions and answers be recorded and posted?
Yep, great question. So we are recording this meeting, and we will be posting it online at the project website. So folks can watch this meeting or watch portions of this meeting. We do need to make the recording accessible, so it takes a little bit of time for our team to do that, but I hope that it will be posted maybe next week or the following week.
Thank you, Sarah. Carrie, the next question is for you. Generally, what percentage of studies end up being an NPS designation?
In the past 20 years, approximately 1 in 4, a little bit better than 1 in 4 studies has resulted in some kind of designation, whether by the president using his authority under the Antiquities Act or by Congress. And one other thing to know is after, and Sarah's already mentioned this, but after a study is transmitted to Congress, there's no timeline for legislative action. So legislative action or the action by the president could happen anytime in the future, well after a study is transmitted to Congress. So that's why I say to date about 1 in 4, but that could also change.
Thank you, Carrie. Next question is for you, Sarah. Are there already recognized natural or cultural resources in this site shown in the map that influence the decision to launch this study? If yes, how can we see that description or list?
So the the decision to launch the study was made through legislation, and that legislation asks us and specifically calls out, I forget I don't have the exact words memorized, but the coastline from Will Rogers State Beach to Torrance Beach, San Pedro south of Crescent Avenue, and the Ballona Creek and Baldwin Hills and surrounding areas. So that's what launched the decision to launch this study. As far as what went into creation of that public law, that is not part of the law. So that's we just took the language of the law, and that's really how we created our study map. However, we are looking into, what national historic landmarks exist within the study area, what other naturally significant resources exist within the study area. We can't share a list with you at this point in time. However, you will see that in the finalized study once it's transmitted to Congress.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question is for you. Could the village green that is designated a natural cultural landmark and is near Ballona Creek, but approximately 10 miles inland from the coast, be part of the national park as a detached unit of the Los Angeles Coast National Park?
That's another resource, and I believe it is a National Historic Landmark, that it is kind of near the study area that we have identified currently. That is privately owned, and that was part of the reason why it's been excluded from the study area at this point in time. However, if there are reasons that you would like to share with us, that you'd like us to include it in the study area, please feel free to share those.
Thank you, Sarah. Carrie, a question for you. If the NPS takes over, what services do they take over? What about lifeguard services? What happens when there is a government shutdown and parks close?
So for areas that are in partnership and a collaboration model for a national park unit, it really depends on the partnership agreements the National Park Service may have with the authority over those areas, like in this case, beaches, lifeguard services. It really depends on what those ownership agencies need and whether they would request services from the National Park Service in that case. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. And that's also the same for during the instance of a government shutdown or a temporary lapse in federal appropriations. It's also on very much on a case-by-case basis. It's not always the same, so it's really hard to make that prediction. In the past, there have been fewer staff available to provide NPS services, but again, it really depends on a whole variety of things, which lands and areas the NPS directly manages and owns and provides full staffing for. And in cases where the NPS doesn't provide all the staff, often the other non-federal agencies may do more of those services during those periods of time. So that's what's happened historically, but it really can change depending on the situation and depending on the park.
Carrie. Sarah, a question for you. What is the upstream limit of the study area in Ballona Creek?
Sure. So the Ballona Creek bike path, I think, is like 6.7 miles. And I believe that the study area follows that alignment and ends kind of a little bit north of like the Kenneth Hahn State Recreation Area.
Sarah, another question for you, Carrie. How does the NPS fund employees who are presently working in the study area?
Oh, funds. National Park Service has no effect on any kind of funding on employees working within the study area we have now. So there's no connection between the funding for the study that we're conducting now and what's going on the ground. I hope I'm answering that question correctly. So our funding is separate. Their analysis is a separate project that we're undertaking that does not affect any of the federal employees working in the study area in LA now. Sorry, Wes, I think you were about to continue.
No, I just appreciate you weighing in. Thank you for that. Sarah, a question for you. The legislation for the study was drafted prior to the Palisades fire. I would suggest that the fire-affected areas should be considered for the study area, as those are privately owned. The newly exposed beaches could be secured for public use if brought into the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. What will it take to include these areas in the study?
I definitely think that fire is a important consideration for the study and obviously for the area, given the Palisades fire and other potential for fire. So currently we are not including privately owned parcels into the study area. However, if there are public lands that are within that area, we would be happy to continue to consider that as additions for the study area.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question for you. Venice Canals, Delray Lagoon Park, and Ballona Lagoon Marine Preserve are all tidal estuary, and part is below sea level, but part is at mean high tide level and within 200 yards of mean tide, and are owned and managed by the City of Los Angeles. There's a question mark there. I'm not quite hearing the question in that, but if you could weigh in on that, I think that would be appreciated.
That's great information. And we are working with the City of Los Angeles, where we reached out to the city to discuss, their interest in us including those properties in the special resource study, as well as seeking information from the city on the properties.
Thank you, Sarah. Another comment for you, Sarah. I encourage you to expand the area to include the historically Native American Tongva tribe area of the Ballona Lagoon and Grand Canal sections.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you for that suggestion. Definitely put that in the project planning website. I will add that we are consulting with tribes and we do have some meetings scheduled to discuss the special resources study with various tribal nations.
Thank you, Sarah. Carrie, a question for you. National parks often showcase and interpret lighthouses, and while there are 2 lighthouses in the San Pedro area, there is also the Point Vicente Lighthouse, where many people come to watch whale migrations. However, this area is on the Palos Verdes Peninsula and not included in the boundary. Plus, there are important natural areas on the Palos Verdes Peninsula with important endangered species habitat. Can the Palos Verdes Peninsula be added? It would make a more sensible line from Torrance to San Pedro to include Palos Verdes.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, there are a number of good suggestions and good thought going into what should be considered within the study resources. However, we are pretty clearly directed to only look at a certain area by the legislation, and that's true for any study law. It tells us to look at a geographic area, and we're limited to only looking within that area. But that doesn't stop you from please making suggestions. We'll take a look at that overlap and see if whether any of that could be interpreted within the limitations of what the study legislation tells us to look at. So appreciate the suggestions for your comments.
Thanks, Carrie. Sarah, another question for you. 2 islands in the Los Angeles County coast, but offshore, one private and the other federal, being the U.S. Navy San Clemente Island, be included as they are part of the LA coast, possibly expanded and recommended for consideration with a revised map, and there are 2 islets at Catalina, namely Bird Rock and Indian Rock, with endangered birds and endangered animals.
I think the response is maybe the same as what Carrie just mentioned. We welcome the suggestions. We are focused on the legislative boundary of the study area, but I will say that the description of that is somewhat general. So there's definitely some opportunities.
Thank you, Sarah. Carrie, another question for you. How long does the study remain active or amenable to congressional action?
Forever. So really it means that once the study is transmitted to Congress, there is no timeline. They don't expire. Of course, the data and the description of the situation that is captured in the study, that's time bound because that is a snapshot of the study timeline or period that we're studying the area right now. But once the report is transmitted to Congress, Congress may not act, but we have examples of park units that were established years after a study was submitted to Congress. So there is really no expiration date with a study.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Sarah, a question for you. What congressional members in Los Angeles are you interacting with for this study?
Yes, we have the 2 congressional representatives, Ted Lieu's office, Nanette Diaz-Barragan's office, as well as the 2 senators, Senator Padilla and Senator Schiff, listed in our contact list. So we have shared information with those offices.
Thank you for that information, Sarah. Carrie, a question for you. Do historic sites or historic districts on the National Register of Historic Places, even if not yet proceeded to the next level of recognition to being considered a national cultural landmark, meet significance criteria?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. For cultural resources, a site does not need to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places or even a National Historic Landmark, but we do use that National Historic Landmark criteria as an evaluation tool to help us answer the question, is this resource nationally significant? So that's the analytical framework we use, but a resource doesn't need to be already designated. It's helpful for us to start by looking at that list of National Register of Historic Places. They could be significant at the local, regional, state, or national level. So just because it's on the National Register doesn't mean it's nationally significant. But if it's an NHL, it is because of that same criteria. So it's helpful to see what's already listed, but we also look beyond that to see whether there's any other resource that may have not have gone through the same designation process. So it's pretty open. But yeah, resources do not need to already be listed in order for us to consider them as potentially nationally significant.
Thank you, Carrie. Sarah, a follow-up to an earlier question. With regards to the question about unique coastal beach ecosystem versus a forest, tree, or land and soil park, I'm asking how the NPS differentiates between the two. People too often think that any open space is equal to any other. As we consider the park scarcity of certain regions, for example, the West LA, Santa Monica region, people get confused about having the coastal area or beaches be included as a count of percentage of parks resident, when really the coastal beach ecosystem is very different from the natural resources and services provided by land, soil, plants, and tree/forest park.
Oh, cool. Okay, thank you to the person who followed up on the previous comment, because I wasn't quite sure what they meant. So as you know, the National Park Service does manage all types of different ecosystems, including coastal and beach areas, including deserts and forested areas. So what we will do for this study is really apply those 4 criteria. So we're really looking at does the area, either individually or as a whole, meet the criteria for significance national significance for cultural resources or natural resources. So that will be applied in this study, and that's really what we'll use to determine, our findings.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question for you. Is a federally endangered species, such as the El Segundo blue butterfly, but generally automatically included as significant naturally? And would native plants on the endangered species list automatically be considered significant naturally?
I'm not able to share the findings at this point. We're really at the beginning of our study evaluation, but we will definitely look at that and apply, for natural resources, there were those 4 additional criteria that all must be met. So that will be part of our analysis.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question for you. Is there any plan to green/remove the concrete Ballona Creek section, Kenneth Hahn State Recreation Area, to Ballona wetlands?
Well, I am not sure what the plans are of the property owners that own and manage those properties at this point in time. And the study that we're doing would not address any planning for, future of any of the properties. So it's probably best for that person to check in with the property owners and the managers of those areas that they're interested in. And I will also say that we suggest that property owners, continue with their plans. Don't let our study change your plans, because as Carrie has mentioned as well, we don't at this time know what the findings will be, and ultimately we do not know what Congress or the president may or may not do, and on what timeline that may be.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question about San Pedro. Could the U.S. Fort MacArthur in San Pedro and owned by the Department of Defense and includes the Korean Friendship Bell on that federal land and a marine mammal and bird rescue center on that same federal land of the fort and very close to the 200-yard threshold on the red line map still be considered?
Yeah, I think that falls in under a lot of the other comments about potential areas that we could include in the study area. Please send us that comment. Tell us why. Tell us about the nationally significant resources there, and we will at least consider whether the boundary should be adjusted to include those resources, those lands.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question. Does 3 federal lighthouses on the Los Angeles coast, namely Point Fermin and Point Vicente and Angel's Gate, and would it set a record for a national park to have 3 lighthouses in a single national park? I'm not aware of any national park as yet with 3 federal lighthouses, or do you know? I ask because I think lighthouses are key features of many national parks, as for example Cabrillo National Monument in San Diego, just down the coast. And could staff at Cabrillo National Monument with expertise on lighthouses be asked to be involved in management of our 3 federal lighthouses on the Los Angeles coast?
Well, I'm not sure if it would set a record. I'd actually have to look that up. But given that the person who made the comment said that they're not aware, that's that may be true. And it is true that many national parks do have lighthouses within their boundaries. And then let's see. So, could staff at Cabrillo National Monument with expertise on lighthouses be asked to be involved in management of our 3 federal lighthouses on the Los Angeles coast? That's a good question. I think it wouldn't hurt to reach out to the management team at Cabrillo National Monument. They may have ideas to point to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question for you. Are you aware that the moneyed forces trying to destroy the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve claimed they wanted to restore it to provide more public access while simultaneously keeping the gates locked and preventing the public from visiting?
I know that there's a lot of history to this project area, and many we've read quite a bit. We're definitely trying to educate ourselves on the area. However, that said, we are really focused on applying the criteria to our analysis of the area. So, we will look at, like, is public access provided? That is one of the considerations for one of our criteria. So we are aware of at least of, some of the public access to the different sites.
And Sarah, if you don't mind, I'll add that for resources that do meet the criteria for national significance suitability, they move forward to a pretty extensive feasibility analysis. And that feasibility includes threats to resources, including access, like you just mentioned. But that's where we want to know everything about what the National Park Service would need to know and be aware of in order to effectively manage that area, if so authorized. So at that point, knowing about any potential threats now and in the future, that's where we could compile all of that input and feedback. So thanks for that.
Okay, one last question here. Although maybe I shouldn't say that. If other people do have additional questions, please feel free to continue to submit. But this one did just come in. Is it possible to obtain an extension of time for public comments given the significant information the public still needs to submit?
At this point in time, we do not anticipate extending the public comment period. If there is a compelling reason, sometimes we've done that. If like our website is down for a significant amount of time, or maybe if there's like a significant event or natural disaster that occurs. So I'm not anticipating that we would increase that time. I will say that agencies, landowners are free to reach out to us and chat with us and talk with us. Even after that date, we will still be accepting information. But just, to make this process efficient, to allow us to meet the timeline and meet our duties under the law, we would encourage everyone from the public to please try to submit your feedback by April 6th.
Sarah, another question for you, or a question for Carrie, I beg your pardon. Could a recommendation of the study be for the NPS and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to do cooperative joint management of the Ballona Creek levees and urban estuary for a future national park? Are there examples where the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and NPS work together? And I'm wondering if Lake Mead National Recreation Area on the Colorado River, where 3 states intersect.
Certainly, if the study process gets to an analysis of potential management scenarios and a joint cooperative model between the National Park Service and other federal, state, or local agencies looks like a feasible scenario, we could consider that. And if that were to be the Army Corps of Engineers, we would consult with them and see if that would be something that would be a feasible option. So, and yes, there are many examples of national parks where the Army Corps may play a role and NPS cooperates with them as another federal agency. So if we get to that point where we're considering those management options, we will be thinking about those kinds of cooperative opportunities if they seem feasible.
Thank you, Carrie. Sarah, a question here. Are you aware that the fossil fuel industry and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife operate as a team? Indeed, it seems like the California Department of Fish and Wildlife acts like it works for the gas company and is more interested in protecting the gas company's interests than the wildlife, even though we are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife treats wildlife as the enemy and just okayed the slaughter of the deer on Catalina. Are you aware that the fossil fuel industry in the California... Oh, I beg your pardon, it was pasted twice. So the question is, are you aware that the fossil fuel industry and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife operate as a team?
Okay, thank you for that comment. I think that's another example of put it into our project website. The team will take a look at all comments, we'll read all of them and analyze those and use those as part of our feedback or part of our study information. So thank you.
Sarah, there's a question here. Will this meeting be published anywhere? Is the audio being recorded? And a note of thank you from the commenter, not from me, but I thank you as well.
Yeah, this meeting is being recorded and we are planning to post it to the project website. We have to do a few things to make it accessible, and that takes a little bit of time. So my hope is that sometime next week or the following week, it will be posted online. So go to the project website to find it.
Thank you again, Sarah. And that takes us to the end of the questions. Nothing further has been submitted.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody again for meeting with us. I hope that this presentation was informative to you. We are so thankful that you are engaging in this process, and you are welcome to join us at our March 11th meeting. We will present the same information, but which takes about 30 minutes, and then we will have our Q&A period again. So if you think of more questions, you're welcome to join us for that. And that is it for now. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day.